I didn't actually take a whole lot of notes because I'm actually, in a very selfish way, very, very glad you're such an expert on this crap. Because I was like, you know what? For once, I can kind of be the student, and Nick can be the mentor, and I don't have to over prepare because Nick's been preparing for this episode for 20 fucking years.
Yeah, no, well, not quite that long. An expert is very generous. I always feel like if you put something out on the internet, there are going to be plenty of other experts and people with opinions.
Yeah, well, it's like martial arts. There are white belts and there are blue belts, and there's
Right.
brown belts and black belts. But yeah, when it comes to John le Carré, I am most decidedly a white belt. But anyway, I'm just going to start rocking and rolling. Folks, we are here for Wrong Reel episode 156, and returning to the show is recurring guest host Nick Berry. If you are not familiar with Nick, you should check out our James Bond episode, Man Who Would Be King, Rules of the Game. Am I missing any others?
No, I think those are the three we've done.
Well, today we're here to discuss the writer John le Carré and movie adaptations from his novels. There's a brand new flick that just came out in the States called Our Kind of Traitor, which I believe came in the UK a couple months ago. But on this side of the pond, it's brand spanking new. So we thought we would talk about his books a bit, some of the more worthy film adaptations, and then give y'all a little review of the movie. But thank you so much for coming back to Wrong Reel.
Well, Jamie, it's great to be here. It's a great topic, and looking forward to diving in.
Well, I am utterly uninformed and borderline retarded on this topic because when it comes to like MI6, CIA, espionage thrillers, this type of fiction, it's a huge blind spot for me. I mean, I see the occasional film that kind of dangles its feet over the water, but I do not immerse myself typically in this particular genre. But I feel like you've been recommending this guy's books for a long time, and I finally took a crack at one, Spy Who Came In From the Cold, and I saw Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. So that's the extent of my preparation going into this episode. But how many of his books would you say you're kind of like on familiar terms with?
Yeah, I would probably say I've read now 7 or 8, and I think there have got to be 12 or 15. Maybe that number's a little high, but he was a prolific writer, and The Spy Who Came In From the Cold was his third novel, but undoubtedly his breakout of his writing career. And I think it's still one of his best, and it introduces some of his greatest characters, and it's undoubtedly cynical, and it was the start of how he somewhat defined the Cold War spy genre, and it's a great read. So I recommend it to everyone. And Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is another novel that they made a film, and it's kind of a continuation of The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, like some of the same characters.
How many George Smiley novels are there? Because I've had George Smiley appears pretty briefly in The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, but he's obviously a more prominent character in some of the other quote-unquote George Smiley novels.
Yeah, I think there are 5 or 6. There might be more. Again, I'm not an expert on the numbers. I know that I've read at least 5 or 6 of them, and George Smiley, to me, is an absolute favorite of the spy genre. He is a classic kind of English spy master, and the way he's featured by Le Carré is a chess player, an industry man, someone who uses the pieces on the chessboard in an effort to keep England safe or to be ready for the Cold War.
It's kind of the polar opposite of James Bond. I mean, he uses very different tools and weapons. He's equally deadly and effective and equally ruthless and cunning, but he's not, banging babes and shooting bad guys and that sort of thing. It's a very different kind of hero. Yeah,
without a doubt. And for those that don't know, George Smiley is a doughy, pale, small, round man who has the respect of, maybe I would say the grudging respect of some of his peers, but worshipped by others for his intelligence, his experience. You don't really know all he did in the war. You don't really know all the agents he ran in Asia, in Europe, in South America, but you have a sense that he has done all this, and guys know that his experience is better than theirs. So he's like a very wise M, to draw a parallel in James Bond, but probably far more ruthless. I think Judi Dench tried to play the role of M as a ruthless character.
Yeah, she has a few great moments in Goldeneye. She's like, "I'm not afraid to send you to your death." You're like, "Whoa, that was kind of harsh." But
yeah. The beauty with George Smiley is he never has to say it. Everybody knows it.
Well, I mean, for me, my real exposure to him was obviously this Gary Oldman and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which for me, I think it might be Gary Oldman's best performance in the 21st century. It's so completely different. I mean, if you're used to him in Sid and Nancy or The Firm or Bram Stoker's Dracula or True Romance, like all these films in the 80s and 90s where it's like these kind of like bombastic, larger-than-life performances, George Smiley, it's so contained and it's so reserved, but it's still, you see just like this turmoil, like maelstrom of emotion kind of behind the glasses that you get little hints of, but it's an incredibly just disciplined performance, but I think it's one of the best things he's ever done.
I couldn't agree more. I'm glad to hear you say that, because I sometimes say that to people who may not have seen the film, and they stop listening and roll their eyes and say, oh, well, it's just because Nick loves that genre. But when I originally went into Tinker Tailor, I thought, how on earth have they cast Gary Oldman for this role? He is not George Smiley. He doesn't look remotely like George Smiley. Who
Who would be your perfect casting prior to having seen it? Like, what would you, like, in your mind, who was kind of like embodied the George Smiley?
Well, the fellow who actually plays Percy in the film looks more like George Smiley. And I forget, just I'm blanking on Percy's surname in the film, but he's
whipping out the cast right now.
He's the small, bold fellow who speaks with a Scottish accent, and he's also
Toby Jones.
Toby Jones. He's also the one responsible for the huge fuck up, but he looks like George Smiley if he gained more weight. And so Gary Oldman is not a fat old man. He turns himself into one,
Yeah.
and he hits George Smiley, and every he's running on all cylinders, and he becomes George Smiley. And I thought it was such a great role. The one thing I would equate it to is when they cast Russell Crowe for Jack Aubrey in the Master and Commander, Patrick O'Brien. Russell Crowe is not Jack Aubrey. He doesn't look anything like him, but he played it so well that it became convincing. And the epic fail, and again, just on the spy genre, I would say, was when they cast Tom Cruise as Jack Reacher, and folks who are fans of Lee Child were sick to their stomachs, and the movie was terrible.
Yeah,
and
I
it was so bad,
Yeah.
and it just was like, well, why?
It doesn't seem to have many defenders.
Yeah, I mean, Tom Cruise is Tom. He's just too big to be in that role. Too big a star. Jack Reacher is a 6'6", 250-pound, strange loner. And you've got Mr. Superstar, Ethan Hawke himself. It was terrible. But
Ethan Hunt.
Sorry,
Yeah.
not Ethan
Ethan
Hawke.
Hawke's
Sorry, yeah,
a real life person.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, Mr. Hawke.
Yeah, I saw him briefly at a screening of The General, the Buster Keaton flick, nearby here at the Film Forum. Chunk and I went there early one Sunday morning, and Ethan Hawke was there with a ton of kids. I think he had some of his kids and a lot of their friends were like, that's pretty cool. Like, here it is early Sunday morning, and he's bringing a pack of kids to a movie that's nearly 100 years old. It's still funny as fuck to this day, but it was packed theater, 11 a.m., Sunday a.m., kids howling. I was like, this is pretty cool that, film culture is alive and well in the city of New York. So.
Absolutely. And no, that is neat. It's always fun to see. You live in a neighborhood where it's possible to see all kinds of celebrities.
Dude, I saw The Winter Soldier the other day. I was coming back from working out, and I was going to buy one of my stupid little green drinks that are intended to keep me alive. And I was walking out of there, and I saw Sebastian Stan walking toward me. He was wearing a baseball cap, so he, of course, looked just like the Winter Soldier, a.k.a. Bucky in Captain America Civil War, and he's talking on the phone. And I just went, Winter Soldier! He looked up, I was like, you fucking rock! And he was like, oh, and he kind of smiled and kept talking and walking on by.
Right. Nice.
But I'm a comic book.
Well, actually, I'll say
so.
the other day I saw Ralph Fiennes, who I'll pull it back, it was the star of The Constant Gardener, another great le Carré novel, which was set in Africa and all about big business, basically manipulating the pharmaceutical market and testing drugs on unsuspecting poor Africans, and then selling the drugs for great profit throughout Africa. And Sorry about that. Excuse me. He was married to a very beautiful woman.
Is it Rachel Weisz who plays his wife in it?
You know what? I can't remember.
I think it is.
It very well could.
Yeah, 'cause I saw that when it came out. But I'm embarrassed to admit, I don't remember a single detail. I think it came out around 2004, 2005. I think
It was a while back.
Baked beyond description, and literally my mind just went and just kind of absorbed nothing.
It's a very dramatic movie in a little bit slow moving. The book is great. But it is this classic
It is Rachel Weisz.
Yeah.
Directed by Fernando Meirelles. Yeah, it's got Danny Houston. It's got a bunch of good people in it. But anyway, Ray Bunn's one of my favorite living actors.
Yeah, and I mean, so it's another great film. It's another great read. It's a demonstration again of le Carré's, I think, natural cynicism towards institutions. He grew up. Right before the war, was in prep school during World War II, and I think he joined MI6 after he graduated college, and I think he ended up being quite a cynic, and you see that everywhere. But I think it was easy to
writing in the late 50s.
In the late 50s, I think The Spy Who Came In From the Cold was
like
early
62
60s. Yeah, exactly.
or something like that.
Early 60s. And
I think there's a movie from like 65. So
yeah, I think that's right. And I think the empire was gone. You had a generation of men killed. You had kind of the nationalization of all the industries, and a lot of industries they had to sell to foreigners just so they could survive the war. And so Britain, I think, was in a very much a secular decline, and I think that kind of preyed on him a bit.
Also, food was being rationed. I remember one of my teachers, when I did the Woodbury and Britain trip, when I was there for 9 weeks, our teacher, he was a kid during that time, he says, "Oh, well, I got terribly fit." But, that was a nice positive spin on, we just weren't allowed to eat, but so much in any given day, because there just wasn't that much food to go around.
There wasn't at all. And he also, he had John le Carré, his real name is David Cornwell.
You ever publish any books under his actual name? Or
I don't know. I don't think so. And the pseudonym is also, I don't know that he ever said where he got it. I think it's just...
It sounds awesome.
It's like French or something, and I don't know, the John the Square or something. But he...
it's very romantic.
He had the man had an incredible background in that his father was this unbelievable hustler, thief, grifter, scumbag, just horrible person.
Like a Harry Lime character.
Even worse, with exactly like Harry Lime, with a bigger personality. That Harry didn't have children who he used in his schemes, and frankly, I think they might have even been abused. And he sent his sons to boarding school, where I think British boarding schools in that era, especially even the very best, but as soon as you start marching down the ladder, these kids got savaged, not only by their peers.
Got caned by the teachers,
Caned by teachers. So
sexually abused by their fellow students. It was not a fun experience.
And if you're essentially, you have parents who clearly don't love you and aren't looking out for you, but, his father ran for parliament, almost won, but he had hundreds of corporations that he was using to rip people off, and some of these schemes were successful, some weren't. Le Carré wrote a book called A Perfect Spy, and it's very autobiographical.
Was that made into a movie?
I don't know if it was or not.
The name sounds really familiar.
It could have been. I haven't seen the movie, but it's all about his father and someone who is a perfect spy because he's so comfortable lying and telling stories and taking advantage of women.
TV miniseries from 1987.
87, wow.
Yeah.
I bet it was popular because
it's 6 hours long.
That's another great read, but his father was one of these really awful people who truly, their stories of even after Le Carré was very successful and incredibly wealthy, he said that he would be on a book tour in Hong Kong and would get a random call from his father who was in some Hong Kong jail and say, "Son, I love you so much and I just need 100 pounds to get out of jail. And his son would come and bail him out, but he never spoke to him. He said provide a bit of the money, but
So
just
any
not so
romantic
much.
illusions he might have had about life were utterly decimated by the time he was a young man.
Without question. And I think he spent some time in Switzerland. And again, it gave him a facility with languages. It gave him an ability to blend in, just because he was on his own and was probably looking for some affection somewhere, but was also probably just trying to hide in the herd so he doesn't get
What
shit beat out of
function
him.
did he perform at MI6 before he started writing books?
So I think he was just like a low-level clerk. I mean, the intelligence services are obviously glamorized by a James Bond character, but I think it's information gathering.
Well, that's one thing that's so compelling by the way he writes. He talks about a lot about just like how paper is pushed around the office. It's like, wow, he really knows how offices function really, really well.
Well, that's what I think these guys do. I mean, we think of spies as this glamorous agents in the field who are at risk, and certainly that's a part of it. But for the most part, they read newspapers, listen to the radio,
Smoke a lot of cigarettes.
stay up late, try and figure out what governments are interested in.
I just remember those scenes in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy where it looks like they've been smoking cigarettes for fucking days, talking to each other. It's like, ugh, do y'all ever sleep? Do you ever stop drinking? Do you ever stop smoking? Do you ever stop drinking tea and coffee? And it's just like, just the fuel that keeps them going. It's just, not a lot of good smelling breath in those rooms.
No, I don't think so. And think about, they're in wool clothing and it rains all the time in poorly ventilated places. But it's just for them, it's a continuation of the war. And everybody smoked then. I know American soldiers were certainly rationed cigarettes and given cigarettes by the Army, by the
Oh, it
Navy.
gave my grandfather considerable power because he was not a smoker yet in World War II. So it gave him basically like the ability to bribe people to do all kinds of things because he just had this stash of cigarettes that were allotted to him. And people were very eager to like, hey, dude, I'll do whatever. But I need more smoke.
Yeah, I would say my father was in the U.S. Navy, and he came back a chain smoker because you sit on a ship all day and you are bored out of your mind, and you need to stay awake during your watch. And guess what? Cigarettes are pretty helpful. So
Smoke them if you got them, as
Yeah.
they used to say.
undoubtedly, but Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy as a film, it's a great book, but as a film,
Might be the best cast film of the last 10 years. I mean, it's kind of awe-inspiring who they assembled for it.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's again, the guy who plays Bill Hayden, Colin Firth, who's now in every English film, does an exceptional job. It's a great group.
Well, I mean, it's got Tom Hardy, it's got Mark Strong, it's got John Hurt. I mean, it's like it's just a who's who of astonishing British talent, dating back many, many years. Benedict fucking Cumberbatch. I mean, it's just like it goes on and on and on. But every single character in there, like, wow, like, he's an amazing actor. Oh, he's an amazing actor too. Holy shit, there's like 15 fucking amazing actors in this movie, all just chewing the scenery with one another.
And they all play it so well. Cumberbatch, he does an excellent job as kind of George Smiley's most loyal henchman, and he also in the film is a homosexual, and he breaks up his private life, shows his loyalty to the service. Probably Colin Firth is probably a homosexual, even though in the film he sleeps with George Smiley's wife. George Smiley, we're never introduced to Anne, but she's this gorgeous society belle who everybody says married down to George, but she loves him for his intellect, his loyalty, which is probably why the British government loves him as well. But the interplay of these characters is terrific. And the one thing I wanted to point about Cumberbatch's character, and it's funny, they all play a very upper crust English person. It's assumed that they all probably went to Cambridge or Oxford, but one thing that was, I guess, in MI6 there was quite a lot of homosexuals because they were very good at leading double lives, because it was illegal to be homosexual back then. They could throw you in jail.
Interesting.
And so MI6 was
a lot of love in the trenches, as it were.
Yeah, no, I mean it's and they are all recruited out of
That's
Cambridge.
just the British way,
Yeah,
they have a different view on those things.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it was, in a lot of ways, if you're very insular, if you know who everybody is, you're all from a similar class and you all have similar habits, that can be a great comfort, but it can also lull you into not seeing things you should be seeing. Because clearly, in Tinker Tailor, you have traitors, you have people giving information to the Russians, and
you have some people who aren't even quite clear if they're like a traitor or not. I mean, there's that one guy when Gary Oldman's like, I want to talk to you about loyalty, when they're out there on the runway.
Oh, yeah.
And the guy's breaking down, but he's like, I am loyal, and he's crying, but they've been playing both sides for so long, they kind of get lost amidst the fog of war, as it were.
Absolutely. Well, and that is a great scene, because George Smiley,
like, you chose the wrong side. And it's like, wow, like George Smiley's getting fucking hardcore.
Oh, yeah.
Really quickly.
Well, and that goes back to, I mean, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. I mean, George Smiley sends one of his guys to the wolves to play a part, and the guy plays it well, and he tries to get him out, and he gets killed, and, well, it's Cold War.
Loss of pawn. Get him next time. But yeah, the game of chess goes on.
No, it really is, and I think Tinker Tailor demonstrates that very well.
It's also just a really, really cinematic movie. I mean, I feel like with these movies, it's a very easy trap for filmmakers to get lost in the kind of procedural exposition elements, because there is a lot of talking about the plot. But Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, in spite of most of the movie just being a lot of guys talking in rooms, really feels like visual story and feels like a movie. And that last sequence when you got that song La Mer by Julio Iglesias playing, and you're seeing all the different characters and it's kind of wrapping things up, and Mark Strong, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, stop listening, Mark Strong about to take out the Colin Firth character, and it's like, this is a fucking movie. This is not like a text-bound kind of procedural at all. And so that's what I really responded to in a lot of ways.
No, and I think that's a great point. And the other...
Yeah, directed by someone I never heard of, Tomas Alfredson. Who is this guy?
I hadn't heard of him either, but...
He also directed Let the Right One In? Holy shit, that's a fucking brilliant horror movie from, was it Sweden or Norway? But, yeah, he's from Sweden, but Let the Right One In is one of the best horror movies of the 21st century. So, fuck yeah, they got a good guy for this.
Well, I wanted to also...
He hasn't made a movie since that. Wow, that was his last film. He's got 4 upcoming projects. One called Smiley's People. That's got to be George Smiley.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
When is that coming out?
No release date in sight, but it's got it's I think they just have a screenplay, but it's in development, and it's so you got that to look forward to.
Well, and I think if I'm not mistaken, Smiley's People, I could be getting the books confused, but it is the culmination of the George Smiley books.
Gotcha.
And I, without going into it too much, it is the I guess denouement would be the word.
I'm retarded. You have to explain to me what that means.
It's the climax of George Smiley's career. It's when he finds a chink in the armor of his adversary, which is called Carla, who runs essentially the KGB.
On that note, for people who are unfamiliar with these books or unfamiliar with these movies, there's a lot of terminology that in the books and in the movies is essential for understanding. But like, if you could just give me the cliff notes on, the circus, control, like there's a lot of terms that get thrown around very casually, but if you're new to these, you're kind of like, wait, you almost need like a glossary to kind of decipher some of the terminology that MI6 uses so frequently. So what's kind of like the who's who of some of these like essential terms for understanding his stories?
Okay, so they would never, he doesn't use the word MI6. He gives MI6 the name of the circus, given where its address is, I think somewhere off of Piccadilly Circus, and where the headquarters are. I think, and sometimes now, if you saw the James Bond movie,
Skyfall
when it gets blown up. That's
or is it Spectre and gets blown up?
No, it's Skyfall. It's definitely Skyfall.
Okay.
Yeah, with Javier Bardem and.
That's right, because Javier Bardem's taking them all down. Yeah.
So that's a newer headquarters. I think they sometimes refer to that as the River House because it is on the river. So you have MI6, which is foreign intelligence. You have MI5, which is domestic intelligence, and then you have Special Branch, which is a part of Scotland Yard. That I would say Special Branch and MI5 would equate to our FBI.
Okay.
But they are different departments. So, for example, MI5 and MI6 have a long-running rivalry, and MI6 would rather use Special Branch. When they move in the hotel in Tinker Tailor, there's an old timer from Special Branch. I think they're plainclothes policemen that are allowed to do a bit more than most police. Like, they can be armed. They have an ability to do more. So MI6, though, is foreign intelligence, which George Smiley has always worked in. I'm forgetting, it is possible that John le Carré or David Cornwell, he could have started in MI5. It's not unusual that early in a career to move between the two. But then once you're kind of in one camp, that's kind of it. And by the way, I think American intelligence services have this same problem, rivalries they don't like to share. So then you have the KGB, which is an outgrowth of the NKVD, which the NKVD is like the predecessor organization of the KGB, and that was military intelligence for Soviet Russia during the war. And again, this was where that's a very dangerous job. It was run by a guy named, I think his first name was Lucretia Beria, Beria, who was one of Stalin's most ruthless henchmen. But it's just known for its purges, and you're never safe there. But the head of KGB in the books is a little chain-smoking Russian man named Karla. That's obviously a female's name, who they have this hazy picture of. And in Tinker Tailor, it's in the main war room, so to speak, this hazy picture of who they think he is. And that is the Grandmaster chess player that seems to keep thwarting George Smiley. And with regards to Tinker Tailor, I'll just follow up on one thing that I think is important, is it's very much based on a true story. So Britain had these terrible leaks in their intelligence services in the 1950s, and I think it was 3 or 4 people defected to Russia.
Oh, fuck.
The most famous is Kim Philby. Then there was, I think it's Donald McLean, and I'm forgetting the name of the other. But they were all, again, these were gay men who were into the arts, which that was the other thing. If you're art dealers, things like that, you're talking about the fellow on the runway. Again, I'm forgetting his character's name at the moment. I'll think of it here.
Yeah, I'm looking at the IMDb, but the cast is so big, I'm having a hard time placing him because it's just an enormous, long list.
Toby Esterhaus, sorry. Okay. I can't believe I forgot good old Toby, who's from Eastern Europe. And Toby Esterhaus, in one of the novels, he kind of retires as an art dealer. And again, this is great for the intelligence services because an art dealer can go anywhere in the world, be among the very rich, get the good gossip. The art deals are always very sketchy, so you've got people who want to launder money. So the intelligence services like to use these types, and this did happen in the 50s, and they had these huge defections at the top, the very senior levels of MI6, and it was devastating to the intelligence services, and that's why Tinker Tailor, when he's talking to like the minister, who's probably the minister in charge of intelligence services or defense, something like that, is so determined to not be associated with these traitors, and that's when he relies on George Smiley to do the mole hunt. And the mole hunt, he becomes successful. His boss, Control, that's the word for, the equivalent of M. For John le Carré, you would call M Control, is hounded out of the circus because he's trying to find a mole. And Smiley realizes he was onto something and gets the evidence. But of course, it's super destructive to the institution he loves.
And in the books, at any point, is George Smiley Control?
He becomes Control, yeah, absolutely. In Tinker Tailor, he becomes Control.
Okay, gotcha.
So when that old timer, if you remember, there's
so John Hurt, who's the old timer, or
he's got the grizzled, really.
Or is it the actor? Oh yeah, John Hurt is in the IMDb credits. He's just cast as Control.
Control. Okay, yes, so absolutely. And when he dies, well, at the very end of the movie, Smiley becomes Control once he finds where the leaks are coming from, that Bill Hayden had betrayed them all, and then he becomes control.
Yeah, but that movie, I mean, there's a darkness to it and a savagery that is kind of shocking initially. I mean, the movie opens with this incredible scene where Mark Strong's being shot down by the opposition, and there's this poor girl who's breastfeeding her child. The girl gets caught in the crossfire, and the baby's still trying to breastfeed after the girl's lying there dead with like her brain straining out of her head. And I was like, oh my fucking God, like this is not your ordinary kind of, like, I don't know, clean and friendly spy thriller. Like, this is going to show some darkness. And later on you see Mark Strong when he's being interrogated, and they bring the girl out, the Tom Hardy's character is desperately trying to get free, and they ask him a question like, do you recognize her? And he says no, and they just blow her brains out right in front of him. I mean, this is a dark fucking movie.
Oh, absolutely.
Pulls no punches.
And there's no doubt that he was badly tortured, and he comes back. I think
Colin Firth gets him back, and Gary Oldman's like, well, that was decent of you, or something like that.
Yeah, and exactly. It's like, yeah, you've psychologically damaged someone who's probably psychologically fucked up to begin with, but he comes back and he knows. That I think that's why George Smiley uses him so effectively, because he knows there's a mole as well. Because he says, he said, I'm going to have to confess, like they're going to make me confess. So I'm going to confess everything except the most important thing. And the questioning leads with the most important thing. So they already know everything. And so Bill Hayden, Colin Firth, had obviously set this guy up. And it was an exercise for Carla to learn, what does George Smiley know, his counterpart. And there's a great scene in that bar scene where we don't see Carla's face. We only see a little chubby hand holding a cigarette, and there's a lighter, and the lighter says, to George from Anne with love. And Carla, that's how you identify Carla, because George and Carla met when they were young men, and Carla was being sent back almost certainly to be executed in a flushing of the NKVD. And George tries to turn him, and he tells this story to Benedict Cumberbatch, Peter Gillam, and George tries to turn him, and the guy chooses to face his death rather than become a traitor. And in that process, through talking, George reveals more about himself, which gives Carla the upper hand in the future.
It'd be interesting if, like, in another lifetime, if John le Carré had written the exact same series of books from the opposing point of view, just to get the flip side of the equation, because I imagine it would be equally riveting, if not more so.
Oh, I think so. I think so as well. The beauty of the kind of the notion of communism, I think, was, especially in that region where you have so many ethnicities and cultures and language, communism kind of made the argument, everybody come. We're going to take care of everybody. Everybody's going to be looked after. Everybody's welcome. Everybody's equal to these folks who've
party
been...
in my pants and everybody's coming.
Yeah, these folks who've been abused there for multi-generations. And it was quite an appeal. But then, of course, you get inside and it's like, okay, now do what I say. And you're like, well, and then they blow your brains out. And that obviously is not so great.
What's that line by Stalin about, like, killing one person's a tragedy, but you kill, like, 500,000, it's a statistic or something?
Yeah, I think it's something to that. I mean, there's stories with, like, Beria where he was given, like, a list and he put, like, an X on the top just to note that he had read it. And of course, it was something like 2,000 people were executed the next day. And he was like, no, I read it. So it's a brutal life. I mean, this kind of little chat about Russia we'll continue it when we review the current movie that we just saw.
Absolutely,
it'll fit in well. But
we're 40 minutes in, so maybe it's time to press pause, have a quick chance to refill our beers and scotches, and then we'll come back to review our Kind of Traitor.
All right, sounds good.
Hey everyone, this is James. This is a chance just to do a little bit of advertising for our friend Leanne Kubitz, who you might have heard on episode 150 about Dig. She has a company called 1898 House, and 1898 House lacquers based in Kansas City, Missouri are 5 free, containing no formaldehyde resin, toluene, camphor, or DBP, which are harmful chemicals often present in nail lacquer. No need to put your health at risk in order to have cool looking nails. 1898 house lacquers are professionally made in the USA and not tested on animals. Their lacquers are for all ages and genders because everyone can enjoy the fun of nail painting. Check out 1898 house blind boxes for fans of intrigue or the indecisive. Open up a box of mystery today. And you can find their website at 1898-house.com, or you can find them on Twitter at 1898house. Thank you so much for listening, and now back to our regular scheduled program. All right, well, we are back. We're here to discuss the new flick, or at least it's new for Americans, Our Kind of Traitor. It's, obviously based on the work of John le Carré. It's directed by Susanna White, a director I was totally unfamiliar with. She's got a ton of TV credits, but it appears as if this is her feature film debut. But the film, it stars Stellan Skarsgard, who's incredible, and you got Ewan McGregor, and who else is in it? Oh, you got, of course, Naomi Harris, who was famous from the James Bond films as the new Moneypenny. But I'd read a lot of lukewarm to kind of semi-critical reviews, so I kind of went with low expectations, expecting a pretty slow, dreary movie, and was delightfully surprised by a very taut thriller with one of the funniest performances of Stellan Skarsgard's career as this Russian money launderer who's essentially trying to use an English professor in order to negotiate with MI6, basically going turncoat on the Russian government and coming over to the UK in exchange for secrets about who Russians are bribing in the British government in order to accept dirty money into the British economy. And it's this great scenario. It starts out with just a couple on holiday in Morocco, and the wife goes off to take a business call, and all of a sudden Stellan Skarsgård just moves in on Ewan McGregor, tells him not to be a sourpussy, and then invites him over to have a few drinks. And next thing you know, they're off at one of the craziest parties ever caught on film. And anyway, I had a fucking blast watching this. I thought it was a very, very well executed movie, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it.
I couldn't agree more. Again, Stellan Skarsgård, I think there's something about, Russian mobster that can be totally frightening, totally ruthless, but they are the Tony Soprano jacked on steroids, just these giant ids.
Yeah, Tony Soprano with no sleep and a lot more money.
Yeah, and just go crazy. And they have just, the folks who survived the fall of communism and who made money, they were all criminals. I mean, a pack of criminals. And there's no denying that. And these oligarchs who are all, own British football/soccer teams, they're hiding their money abroad, and they're trying to have a high profile abroad because, quite frankly, I'm sure they're afraid if they piss off Vladimir Putin, it'll all go away and they'll be in jail. And that's the best case scenario. So these gangsters who know how to launder money, who know how to get involved in foreign markets and do shady dealings, I'm sure were good friends of the oligarchs, because the oligarchs needed that, and sometimes the two were the same. But he's tattooed out, and he's a ruthless motherfucker who loves his family, which is also, he has a softer side. That's one thing with the movie, that you're on his side because he's so likable, but you also...
Like, this is a guy who has killed people. When they go to this party, and Ewan McGregor essentially intervenes on behalf of a girl who's being raped by this guy who looks like 600 pounds of Russian sculpted, like, stone and muscle, covered in tattoos. And the way he did afterwards, Stellan Skarsgård's like, oh, that person, the knife on his chest, that means he kills people. And the things on his shoulders, that means Russian mafia. And it's like, he's so casual and blasé about it. It's like, he's been dealing with these kind of people for forever. Like, he knows Absolutely. These people really, really well.
Well, and it's funny, I read a book recently about a Russian, an American who went to Russia in the early 90s to start a hedge fund and did incredibly well, but he had his business partners killed, and he then became more of a human rights activist. It's
in a crisis of conscience.
Yeah. Luckily, he had a lot of money in the bank to then do that. But it's a great read. It's called Red Notice, and it talks about the pilfering of the Russian economy by a very select few, and criminals were very involved. But I was reading something else just out of interest about the serfs in Russia, so prior to the revolution, it was essentially, serfdom was essentially slavery by another name. And, this was, they enslaved thousands and thousands of these peasants who weren't allowed to own land. They were allowed to farm the land. But, the systematic abuse.
Revolutions do not happen in a vacuum.
Exactly. The systematic abuse. So there's this culture of that. And then you're also, I've never been there. I have a very good friend who lives there, has been there for 10 years, and he still says it's absolutely crazy. But you're in one of the harshest, nastiest environments. It probably makes you a pretty tough motherfucker. I mean,
well, I've been to Moscow only very briefly. I was there for a couple of days, and it's so completely, utterly unlike any major city I've ever been. I mean, of the great cities on the earth that I have visited, I mean, it's like Tokyo, Seoul, London, Rome, Madrid, New York, obviously, Los Angeles. Like, I've been to like some big cities around the world. Moscow is totally different in like atmosphere and vibe. It's very cool and exciting, but feels kind of dangerous. And I had an absolute blast when I was there. I'm thrilled that I visited, but it's a big city where entire blocks would just be one building devoted to one purpose. And it's like, oh, that block is that building. Whereas in New York, you used to like hundreds of storefronts and a lot of buildings in the block and everything. It's like, oh, this block has thousands of people doing a lot of different things. It's like, no, in Russia, that block does that thing. And it's like, it's really industrial. But then in the middle of that, you'll have something like St. Basil's Cathedral, which is this architectural marvel, totally, completely detached from any Western sensibility about how you would design a cathedral. It's like hidden rooms and crazy color schemes. And supposedly the architect, after he made it, was blinded by whoever's in charge of Russia at the time, so you can never design anything as beautiful ever again. Which was like, all right, that sums up Russian culture really, really well.
Great. Yeah. Thanks.
But it's a beautiful building.
I bet. No, I've got to see it at some point. But the Russian mafia, I know very little about it.
The Russian mafia, as the MI6 pronounces it.
Yeah, well, it's funny talking about that. Damian Lewis, if I was going to give one knock, is he doesn't do the English accent that great.
But he's English.
Yeah, I think he's Australian.
Oh, he's Australian.
He could be. You're right. You could be right, but for some reason I thought he was Australian. But he might be English. But he kind of lays it on a bit too thick, because I think he's trying to be the public schoolboy. And
gotcha. He's trying to basically ham it up a tad and maybe overdoes it. Let's see here. Damian Lewis, he was born in St. John's Wood, London, England.
Oh, he was
UK.
born in London. Well, maybe I just thought he was. Yeah, I didn't know the accent. Maybe he's trying to sound a little more upper class, even though he's born in St. John Wood. He was probably. I mean, that's a beautiful neighborhood in London. So, sorry, Damian Lewis. Maybe your accent is better, and I don't know what I'm talking about. But I just thought it was a little stiff. But,
gotcha.
But I liked his character. I mean, I think my impression, and you can tell me what you think about this, was that he's like young George Smiley. He's a little fresh-faced. He thinks he can do things that he can't quite do, and he he has his triumphs, but he gets a hard lesson.
He's got a few slaps on the wrist from MPs that don't like him butting his nose into their affairs or resisting them, and so on and so forth. I mean, one of his children is basically in jail for dealing drugs as a way of kind of keeping him in check. Absolutely,
and I think there's a Smiley novel called An Honorable Schoolboy, and it features Jerry Westerby, who's a great character, who's also in Tinker Tailor, interviewed very briefly. But it's this notion of, and Skarsgard brings this up at one point, it's this notion of England, fair play, honor, gentlemen. And I think, the fresh-faced folks who started MI6, they have all of that, and whether they can keep it or not is tough. And I think Damian Lewis does a wonderful job of saying, yeah, I'm keeping it, but he gets slapped around, as you say, a couple times by the more powerful.
Quick question. Do you think that John le Carré's novels are easily or readily adapted to 2016? Obviously, technology has changed, and with technology changing, obviously, the intelligence business will change dramatically as well. But I know a lot of his books were written in the 60s and 70s and 80s and that sort of thing. Have you noticed any challenges in his books being adapted to contemporary times due to, like, you have to obviously dramatically change, like there's not a lot of like manila folders being passed around anymore and things like that?
No, I think they're great for it. It's like the Fleming books, Casino Royale. they adhered to the book, and that's one of my favorite James Bonds.
It's a damn good read.
And they
It's
didn't have
short.
cell phones.
You can take a dump and read Casino Royale and be like, all right, well, I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to air dry. I don't need to wipe. I'm just going to read this book. And
Yeah, the Le Carrés are all like Honorable Schoolboy. I think that would make a great film, because it's always a people story. Like it's about betrayal. It's about love, and you can add the accoutrements, the modern accoutrements, pretty easily.
Yeah,
So
the technology gets it's like window dressing. The story will fundamentally remain the same.
Exactly, it's people interacting, and you just change the way they interact a little bit, and you can shorten timelines because of cell phones. But no, I hadn't ever read this book, but I thought Ewan McGregor did a great job.
Did that fucker age? I feel like they made, like, I saw Shallow Grave and Trainspotting in the early and mid 90s when I was like, I saw Shallow Grave when I was in high school and Trainspotting in college. He basically looks the same except for maybe a few lines next to his eyes, but like he's got to be 50 years old at this point, but he's like, he looks fucking beautiful. It's like, what the hell are you doing?
Well, I think he's a great athlete and he's built thin, and I'm sure he takes care of himself, but no, he looks very young. I mean, he could pass for someone in his 30s, easy. And he does a great job because seems idealistic, but he also, you can tell there's a problem with his wife.
He's 45. He's born in 71, so he's
not too old.
Not too old.
Yeah, and he does a great job, I think.
Those tennis scenes are fucking amazing. I mean, that's one of the part of like as the story. I mean, spoiler for people who haven't seen it, but part of like the charm of this is how. Is it Dima? Is that the
Dima is
Skarsgard's character, and how they strike up this he strikes with this rapport, this friendship with this professor from England, and they like will meet for games of tennis, and in between they'll like go down to like the massage parlor in order to meet with MI6 and like talk about or negotiate the deal they're trying to come to terms with. But just watching their camaraderie on the tennis court, both in the initial game where they've been up all night doing cocaine and like hanging out, and he's like. I love when Ewan McGregor says like, "Well, I need to get some sleep." He's like, "Oh, I need to spend some time with my wife." He's like, "We'll play before then."
Yeah.
And it's like, did y'all even go to bed, or y'all just out there and like the kids involved and the kids are talking shit? But it's an incredible just. I don't know, joie de vivre or just lust for life, but it's a very contagious atmosphere. Like, wow, you're just gonna drink and fuck and do sports and like make money and just live life to the hilt every second of every day. And it's like there's like a magnetic pull to somebody who has that kind of charisma.
Well, I think it's also he's clearly having problems. Ewan McGregor is clearly having problems with his wife, and
she says to me he cheated on her. He's fucked one of his students.
Yeah, and that's hard to come back from.
Yeah, she's like, you fucked one of your students. There are consequences. Or you make a deal with someone from the Russian mafia. There are consequences.
Yeah, but I think when they're in Morocco or in Marrakesh, there he he's just like having an awful time, and here is this larger than life Russian
just popping bottles of booze,
yeah,
champagne.
He literally he buys I think it's a $60,000 bottle of wine, and it's that's. I don't know about you, Jamie, but that doesn't happen to me on my vacations very much.
That's not my budget. Yeah. But yeah, I love it that he's like talking shit about it on the menu, and then like 5 seconds later, he just passes him a glass, and he's like, gives a little whiff. But also, I love how smart Skarsgard's got an aptitude for numbers, and he basically tricks him into going out. He's like, pass me your credit card, and he's like, if I can memorize your account number in like a couple seconds, then like you have to go out, or I'll pay you $5,000. And
who's not going to take that bet?
Yeah, and he immediately recites back the 16 numbers, which of course becomes a crucial skill later on, because as he does decide to make a deal with MI6, the deal is he needs to provide the accounts where the Russians are bribing all these English officials, and he takes one glance at this page and just like zoom, 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 and just carbon copies it into his brain. And so I just love the fact that he's got this insane aptitude, in spite of the fact that he spends all day just partying his fucking face off.
Yeah, no, he clearly has a photographic memory and is clearly useful to the poobahs there in Russia as a numbers guy and obviously as a brilliant finance person. But the world's changed. He was an old-time gangster, and now there are newer leaders, and you know what? They want everything for themselves.
That's so savage in the beginning when they take out those other guys.
Yeah, which, by the way, the daughter who gets killed, one, when they show her at the ballet, and two, like when she's running in the forest. I mean, she's
like, up to her
smoking hot.
Yeah, up to her ribs in snow in a cocktail dress, trying to escape, and they basically throw her a coat to make her stop, and she turns around and
No, it's
lights out.
and you're like, whoa.
It's some ruthless fucking violence.
Yeah, it's tough. You know what you're up against, but they set that up very well. That they're, again, you're dealing with with killers here, and
Which makes me wonder, what the fuck movie did the critics watch? I mean, I only looked at a few headlines. I didn't read the full reviews, but it's a lot of like, I think on Rotten Tomatoes it's like a 50 or 60% right now. So it's obviously people are divided, but there's a lot of kind of limp-wristed enthusiasm, if any enthusiasm, and it's like, what movie did you see? I saw a well-executed, very solid thriller with some very, very solid performances. I don't know what else people expect from a John le Carré experience.
I agree. Now, do I think this is as good a film as Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy? No, it's just Tinker Tailor.
That's on another level.
Yeah, I mean, I've probably watched that 25 times.
That's
a
lot.
It's
That's a lot.
No, I mean, I love it. I think there's so much subtlety. There's so many good performances. This is a fun movie that I would watch again. I would,
Certainly.
It's
If only
James
to
Bond-esque
memorize some of the colorful expressions that Stellan Skarsgård uses frequently throughout the movie, because he talks so much shit, and he totally steals the show.
No, I think so, and I think Ewan McGregor's wife, Naomi Thomas, I think you said
Naomi Harris.
Yeah, I
Naomi
think
Harris.
she does a very nice job.
She's very solid, without a doubt. I mean, she was great in 28 Days Later. She's really, really good in Skyfall. She's good in Spectre. Like, she doesn't. I haven't seen maybe more than like 4 or 5 movies with her, but she always nails it. And there's just not that many Black British actresses kind of like acting in like mainstream film, but she's beautiful. She's got this beautiful accent, and she knocks it out of the park. And she's also in Miami Vice. The feature film.
Yeah, that's right.
She's Jamie Foxx's lady.
Yeah.
But she's very good, and I feel like she perhaps could have even a bigger career than she has. But I'm just wondering what vehicle. Maybe they should hire her to play Storm in the X-Men movies. And she would explode.
Yeah. No, I mean she's got a great intensity and
a phenomenal physique.
Yeah, she's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so there and I think she and Ewan McGregor do a good job. They're like
hell yeah, no, they got a great
couple.
Yeah, great chemistry.
And then they're looking after the children of Dima, the Russian accountant, and I think that there are some good scenes there because. Again, talking about consequences, it's like these guys are coming not just for you; they're going to slaughter your children.
Yeah.
And it's the one part I would probably be, I was like maybe is a little bit. I don't know how they address this, but Hugh McGregor and his wife in this film, even going back to London, I think they would be in grave danger. You have to remember when like Putin, I forget who is, he had brought some like corporate secrets over to London. This was a guy who was like poisoned. They poisoned the prime minister of the Ukraine. I mean, these are people that kind of don't take no for an answer, and
they're playing for keeps.
Yeah, and so I would
to win.
So Hugh McGregor getting himself in this situation, like working for MI6. I think there's also his wife is like, you are a complete moron if you think you just are a little courier pigeon. They get, and that's what I think Damian Lewis does a good job of. Is he's like, oh, now you're mine.
I guess if I were to point to one, I don't mean if this is a flaw, but from my perception, one weakness the movie perhaps has is that as the couple gets more and more involved in kind of protecting and looking after the family, Stellan Skarsgård, they kind of lose the spotlight as the central characters, because sharing so many scenes with Stellan Skarsgård, I feel like he steals the spotlight on him, but it very much becomes his story protecting his family. And while Naomi Harris and Ewan McGregor are still a huge part of the story and the plot, the first 20-30 minutes sets them up as the stars of the show, and then they kind of get slowly edged out of the central story as it progresses. And so I don't know if that was necessarily, I don't know if it's a flaw or not, because if you like Stellan Skarsgård's character, you just get more screen time with him, but it's he's the better written character. He's the more engaging character. He's the more charismatic character, and he kind of steals all the energy from everyone else around him.
Your eyes are on him, and actually this is what I'll ask you, because when they went to the helicopter, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I was sitting there. I was like, "Oh, he's a goner. They're going to blow it up." And I don't know if you saw, I made my hands go like this.
Just the way it's shot, it's very ominous.
It's very, it's happening. But I'm curious as to who do you think decided to blow up the helicopter? Because MI6 also sacrifices a very good young agent.
It seemed to me as if it was the rival of Damian Lewis, who has left MI6 to go work in the government, who is essentially sabotaging Damian Lewis's attempts to complete this project that he's come up with. But I could be wrong.
Do you think he has friends in MI6 that enabled that?
That's an excellent question. Yeah, I don't know, because I guess
because if so, that would make me a real fucking cynic. I mean, but he probably does. I mean, that's what I was kind of thinking. I was like, did the Russians plant somebody, or did he plant somebody?
Because when they're about to fly Dima and his family out, it's one call from Damian Lewis's adversary, and he shuts that down, and they're going to be refused at the border. They can't even fly into the country.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So very clearly, you've got corrupt British, government officers and the Russian mafia in cahoots with one another. So yeah, it's definitely very cynical in terms of his portrayal of the British government.
Well, the person who shuts it down, that's Mark Gatiss, who I'll throw in a plug for Sherlock, which is the great BBC TV series that he wrote and stars in. And he stars...
Because he plays Sherlock's brother, right?
Yeah, Mycroft Holmes.
Yeah, Mycroft's a great character.
Who essentially, Mycroft is... the joke is runs the British government. He is MI6 and MI5.
And he's the less flamboyant and more serious brother.
Yeah, the smarter one without question. And like he has control of all those. So I thought it was interesting to have Mark Gatiss in there. But that is the one, Damian Lewis is operating without permission.
Yep.
And he gets caught. And Mark Gatiss is like, look, we've got procedures and you've...
exceeded your authority.
Yeah, exactly. You've exceeded your remit here. So I'm amazed Damian Lewis isn't punished. Well, I guess he lost an agent, and you don't see that much remorse, but maybe that's the job, and that agent could have very well been killed by the Russians who came.
Do you wish that we had seen some of the consequences of him finally having the account numbers, or do you think it just goes without being stated that he's going to have his day in the sun where he's victorious over his adversaries?
It's funny you say that. I wanted to see something.
Just a shot of some kind. Even if it's like something on the news, so-and-so has been sent to jail for such and such. Blah, blah, blah.
Or even a perp walk or just something. Yeah. Or,
it was a little unnecessarily cruel to deprive the audience of that moment of satisfaction, because it is a pretty grim movie, and so it would have felt a little bit more like a happy ending. That actually might even be a part of the reason why some critics are a little cool on it, is that they were deprived of that little teeny tiny payoff, which would have sent them kind of like happily striding out there like, wow, that was a fun movie. Like,
yeah, and the thing is, I agree with that. It would have been more fun, but here's the reality. I mean, Russians have been pumping billions into London via homes, banks, soccer
that stat
teams.
They gave about the percentage of the world economy that's like black market in terms of human trafficking, drugs from Afghanistan. Like it was like there's a couple different industries he mentions, but he makes it sound like it's like 5% of the global economy is all just
it's probably more. I mean,
dark,
I don't remember the number,
shit.
But it's like the billions and billions. And I think London now again, New York is not totally clean from this, but I think the U.S. is maybe a little cleaner in that you just don't. Well, actually, we're starting to see quite a lot of that foreign money come into New York these days. But London's always been kind of the banker to the world, as have the Swiss, and that comes up. They're trying to break up those secrecy laws that are holdovers from again World War II and a few hundred years of banking to these criminals. But it is. There are human consequences, and he wants to do the right thing and crack down on some of these bastards who seem to be profiting from it, like this
buying
minister.
Politicians willy-nilly in the UK.
Yeah, and it's I think he's trying to do his job, but I think his boss is like, look, are we going to take on how much of the UK government are we going to take on when these guys are going to pump $10 billion into the city,
economy,
which, remember, London is, this whole Brexit thing that's come up, manufacturing has gone away. It's a service economy, whether it's consultants, lawyers, or bankers, they need something to do because that's the economy. And I think some people don't like the fact that they're banking to some pretty horrible people. But so it is a cynical movie. But Le Carré has always been a bit cynical.
I mean, I guess the question is like, is he cynical, or is he just practical and kind of a realist, and kind of like he refuses to kind of not look at the world with an honest perspective? And
no, and I think that's right. And it's funny. I briefly mentioned Patrick O'Brien in Master and Commander. There was some old story about when Patrick O'Brien, they did some dinner to honor him very late in his life and career, and they said the entire MI6 attended. It's as if the whole building emptied out so they could be there because they're all such fans. I think John le Carré or David Cornwell was very poorly regarded by the intelligence services.
Wow, because they felt like he was almost kind of a turncoat, kind of like airing the dirty laundry.
Absolutely. And I think it's, I remember reading something about when Pat Conroy wrote The Lord's Discipline about the Citadel, 3/4 of his neighbors wouldn't speak to him again because
Persona non grata.
Saying, you don't need to, we're genteel South Carolinians, we don't need you going, unturning rocks to the whole world.
Uncouth.
Exactly. And I think Cornwell or Le Carré has done a bit of that, and I think his peers and juniors don't quite like it.
Well, he's crying all the way to the bank.
No, I know. Yeah, multi-millionaire. Yeah, he's like, look, guys,
people love his books.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in the U.S., like our intelligence services, suffer from some of the same problems. We do some pretty awful shit around the globe, and to just pretend that it's all some high and mighty ideals we're fighting. I don't know.
There's some great conversations in The Spy Who Came from the Cold just about ideology and philosophy and like what are you fighting for, and it's a pretty frank, open, honest discussion about some of these guys aren't fighting necessarily for anything, and like it's just in particular the central protagonist of The Spy Who Came from the Cold is kind of it's almost like irritated that he's having to like confront like what the hell are we doing? And basically he's like, I guess we just think you're all swine, like, or something. I can't remember what he says.
Well, I think it's one of these classic. It's government, and for the libertarians out there, it's government does anything it can to perpetuate itself. So, okay, I had this job, I did my job. Well, I don't want to be fired, and they gave me all this money. Well, I don't want to give the money back. So now I'm just going to create more work
stuff
for
for me to do.
myself.
Yeah.
And if I can get a few junior people on my team, well, then I get more money. And so, if I can convince a politician to allocate me those resources, well, of course, that's what I'm going to do. Because, oh, by the way, I'm 40 or 50. What else am I going to do?
Yeah.
Go write a book?
Be put out to pasture, or have to get some servile position like the character in Spy Who Came from the Cold. When they're creating this illusion that he's been put out to pasture, and so he gets all these kind of servile jobs to kind of help like hammer home the idea that he's on the outs. And it's not a fun life that he has to lead.
No, and I think so that cynicism comes through. But it is nice because I think Ewan McGregor could have left that film being some horrible cynic, but he leaves saying, "Oh, you know what? We got his family out, and that's what he wanted." And he doesn't show bitterness, or he doesn't, punch Damian
he and his
Lewis
wife definitely seem like they're in this to do the right thing. And in the end, you have children who, through no fault of their own, are about to lose their lives. What can we do to save these children? And, of course, you have those two twins whose parents were already murdered.
Slaughtered, yeah.
And so you can tell, like, wow, we finally found, like, a compelling reason to stay together and something worth doing. And so, but that fucking little girl who calls her boyfriend.
Yeah, that was one of those situations where you're just like, oh my God, this is why, it's amazing that they allowed her to have a cell phone.
Yeah.
It just, when they're on the run, it's like you got to confiscate that shit. And she got pregnant by the guy that's
like Alexei or whatever his name is.
Who's a total bastard. Like they all
and they
are.
had this it's not necessarily the world's most dramatic shootout, but I love. There's a great moment where Stellan Skarsgård passes a gun to Ewan McGregor, and he's like, "Don't worry, there's no safety." You just point it, and poof, poof, poof. He's so casual, but the way he just says poof, poof, poof. But he's talking about killing people.
Oh, absolutely.
But you might as well be talking about making a sandwich.
Well, my favorite was in the kitchen when the bodyguard, he just fucks this bodyguard up, and Stellan Skarsgård is he's old, but
so he's got to fight dirty.
But yeah, he's an old gangster, and that guy thinks he's gonna, has his number, and he's like, "Sorry, pal."
Yeah, I'm gonna stick a knife in you.
Yeah, I think in Russia that's something like tattoos. They do the sauna, the spritz or whatever, because they want to see all your tattoos and everything. You have to get it. You don't just get a tattoo because you're like, oh, I think this Chinese character is really cool. Everything is earned.
It signifies something.
Yeah, and it shows, like they say, the star above the heart. I know is the one that gang they mentioned, which is the Vola or whatever. I don't know a lot about it, but I know that is the insignia. But they say if they put them on your knees as well, it's like that means you were like never a bitch in prison or something. And
interesting.
So they have like all that ink means something, and it
tells a story.
Yeah, and it's crazy, and of course there is a scene where they're getting ready for tennis, and his body is covered in tattoos.
He walks out and kind of holds out some little like flash drive he's about to turn over, but it's just full frontal nudity shot. That's like, I think, is that the only nudity in the movie? Because like there are a lot of beautiful women in it, and there's like beautiful women at the party, but do you see any naked women? You
do. Naomi Harris in the beginning, like they're trying to hook up, and they're obviously having problems.
It's not working.
And but no, and the girl who's getting raped at the party, and there's also at the party, like indoors, a girl riding a horse. You're just like,
which is amazing.
You're crazy.
Ewan McGregor looks in the hall,
Holy
and there's
shit.
just this astonishingly beautiful girl just trotting up like this neon hallway, and these people party their faces off.
Yeah, they're absolutely bananas.
And it's like, the amount of money he's like, we're having a small birthday party for my daughter, and it's like, it's fireworks and it's pools and it's like everything
she's
they
gifted
do.
a camel.
Yeah, she's gifted a camel, like dressed in jewelry, and I mean, it's just everything is just so completely obscenely over the top. But he says he's good with money, so I guess that must be like small change relative to what kind of money he's playing with on a daily basis.
My other favorite part was when he signs the paperwork in Bern, which they go through Bern, which is such a beautiful city, and you wish you saw more of that. It's also has always been kind of the center where all Russia, Europe, and U.S. intelligence services always worked out of Bern. So there's like an international. That's where we ran our
kind of neutral
OSS.
territory.
Yeah, exactly. And they're always the place is just filled with spies, but the young Turk, not literally, but the new prince who's kind of taking over, consolidating, the real bad guy. He is about to give this speech, and Skarsgård just interrupts him and tells a story about like when he was a total bitch out hunting, and it's just it's a very Russian, like, I'm gonna insult your macho-ness, and it's like nothing could be worse to a Russian, like being called not a man.
To impugn one's manhood, or lack thereof.
It was great stuff. So he really does steal the show. I mean,
he's a phenomenal actor, and he works his tail off. And his son, Alexander Skarsgård, he's fucking Tarzan now. I don't think Tarzan's going to be any good, but it's like he works. He's like, a sex symbol and all that kind of stuff. So they have a talented. Is it Alexander? Is that the name of his son?
I really don't know. Yeah, you'd have to check,
because he was in obviously like True Blood and all that kind of stuff. But let me see, Skarsgård. I believe it's Alexander Skarsgård. He's a delightfully, devilishly handsome, studly dude, but his father's got the real acting chops. But maybe when his son is not quite so beautiful and he's kind of old and fat and not afraid to walk around with like his gut hanging out and his ding-a-ling hanging around, maybe he'll be equally compelling as a performer, because Stellan Skarsgård gives zero fucks.
No, he's great. He really is amazing. But I think as you said, these stories do they remain entertaining. I wouldn't be surprised if we get a few more spy movies made, just because we live in uncertain times these days.
Also, he's a brand at this point. I feel like there's just so many millions of people out there who love his books, who will probably show up to see any movie or TV show that his name's attached to.
Yeah, so I think you and I spoke about this. I said the Night Manager is this TV show I've seen a couple episodes of with it's Tom Hiddleston, I think is how you say his name, who's
Loki.
In the news these days with his
Tay-Tay.
new love interest T Swift, but he plays a great job. I mean, he does a great job in what I've seen, because I have read that as well, which is, I won't say it's one of my favorite le Carrés, but it's a good story. And but Hiddleston does really well. He's like
awesome.
A former soldier, and he plays like a former soldier really well. And you don't have to be that big to be threatening. Like, he's like a piece of barbed wire, and he is tough and is no nonsense and knows what he's doing.
Dude, if you ever want to laugh your dick off, watch some of his talk show appearances in South Korea and Japan. That he did one interview where they found out that he knows a little bit about how to dance, and they asked him to like show some of the moves, and they start playing this like Korean pop tune, and he starts like tap dancing and going crazy. And it's like, holy fucking shit, like, you could have been Fred Astaire if you'd chosen not to like become an actor. But he's so multi-talented. And I saw a podcast once where he was being interviewed, and they said, yeah, we hear you're a Will Smith fan, like, you know any lyrics? He's like, yeah. He's like, he asked him to like clap or like start a beat, and then he just starts fucking rapping. I was like, what? You're way too talented for one human being, and it's entirely unfair. But yeah, Tom Hiddleston, he's got serious chops and serious talent, and yeah, he just...
Well, the thing is, I think that's something that's lacking these days, is that you go back to, again, it's not like I ever saw this, but like the old vaudeville days where, these guys were like real pros who sing, dance, act.
That's a triple threat.
Just do stuff.
You had to be, if you could sing, dance, and act, you're a triple threat.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that about him, but I thought he did great in Night Manager, and I think that's a show that if you like John le Carré, I think is well worth checking out.
Very cool. Well, I guess the big question is, what's going to be our next topic? I mean, we've covered Renoir, we've covered John Huston, we've covered Jimmy Bond, now we've covered Le Carré. We're going to have to start brainstorming about the next topic. I like the fact that you and I got to cover something contemporary, because I guess last time we covered Bond, it was kind of a warm-up in anticipation of Spectre, but we didn't review Spectre.
No.
We did kind of like a James Bond, like 50-year retrospective of just what makes James Bond cool. But I kind of like it when we have something new to talk about that also invites conversation about some old movies and some old books and that sort of thing.
No, as do I, and given the trailers that we were forced to endure prior to this movie,
steaming pile of dog shit.
I don't think I've seen.
Well, I mean,
such bad.
The reality is,
films presented.
We make a lot of movies every year, and if you're lucky, 5 to 10 of them are really, really good. If you're lucky. And, like I did a couple of YouTube videos recently about 1971, which is my favorite year of filmmaking, and I focused on 8 that I really love, but there were like 30 contenders that could have just as easily been swapped out. But that, for me, is a really, really rich vein. There's some certain years that it is particularly good, but I count myself lucky if you can count on, like, 2 hands how many great movies there were in a given year. But, this summer, the stuff I'm looking forward to, I'm looking forward to Suicide Squad, but the really, really juicy contemporary stuff will start coming out late September. That's when you get your wave of quote-unquote prestige films. But you also get, things like Doctor Strange, like Marvel's expanding from 2 movies a year to 3 movies a year. We got the new Star Wars movie coming out, but we just got to consult the release schedule. But for this, it's just like, I just knew you were a fanatic for Le Carré's books, and when I saw a fucking new movie coming out based on his books, I was like, oh, that's a no-brainer. Like, Nick's coming on to
and
talk
I was
some
to say,
shit.
and also Tinker Tailor. For those who haven't seen it, it's spectacular.
It's special. It's
good.
But
maybe one of these days we should tackle a comedy, and we'll see like good comedy tie it back to some.
Well, we could get fucking stinking drunk and do a commentary track maybe to Caddyshack.
Caddyshack would be a good one. It's funny how it just endures, and
it would get annoying because all we would do is quote the movie, and
right.
like, you don't want to listen to a commentary track if people are just going to quote the movie.
Right. But I think it's funny. I've been watching more live comedy, and it's there's some real talents out there. So maybe we'll find a good comedy movie and tie it back to some others. But just because
like we've tackled a lot of kind of heavy topics.
Yeah,
Bond's
pretty light. Bond's pretty light.
Yeah, Man Who Would Be King, it was like, The Great Game, and like, Rudyard Kipling, and then with like Renoir, it was like, oh, we're just like a dissection of French society on the eve of World War II. So it's like, it's pretty cerebral topics. We need to talk about like some like fart jokes and pussy. And all that
also
kind
I
of
was
good
gonna say,
stuff.
I in a distinctly British focus, which obviously I'm a
This
unabashed
is
Anglophile.
a total no-brainer. With Nell and I.
With Nell would be a great one there, and that's the comedy, great British comedy, and that's that could be a very good one.
Yeah, With Neil and I would be the shit, or maybe talk about some Alan Clark films or things like that. Like, yeah, that's a different side of the UK.
Yeah, that's for those that
that's the side of the UK Thatcher didn't want people.
Yeah,
to know
I would say
about.
also that's the side of the UK that just voted to leave.
Yeah.
For those that
Like,
don't know,
fuck
Alan
off,
Clark,
you fucking cunts. Like,
yeah, this is these guys like they might have tails and or like lizard skin. They're not the
they're not Prince William.
yeah, the burgundy drinking Londoner. But
They watch a lot of football.
But I was talking about Gary Oldman. I mean, he got his start with Alan Clark.
Yeah,
He's
with
in
The Firm.
a number of those. Yeah,
Yeah, like
I
he
mean,
worked with like Mike Leigh and Alan Clark and who's the guy? Alex Cox, who did Sid and Nancy. But yeah, in the '80s, Gary Oldman was just like this meteor or comet of insane talent. It's just like, oh my god, like someone find like a vehicle that could contain all this fury and energy. And obviously now he's much more like he kind of knows when to tap the brakes, and he's much more in control of his instrument.
But Tim Roth was in that.
Oh, he's in Made in Britain.
Yeah,
and like there's Alan Clark from the late '70s to early '90s. People do not know who he is, but I feel like he made some of the most balls deep, risky, insane, like kind of status quo, like assaulting type films that have ever been made in any country ever.
Oh, some of them are downright disturbing.
Yeah.
I mean,
These are like,
most
are like
it's
straight up subversive in some ways.
Yeah.
But I feel like they are so brutally honest and candid about just the British way of life at the time in ways that the propaganda would have you believe otherwise.
Right. I mean, I remember one kind of focuses on like a group home / orphanage, and in
Scum.
Oldman and Tim Roth, there's like kids in this, but that one is, I mean, it's brutal. You think, oh my god, no wonder these people are fucked up. It's scary.
It's not all tea and like scones.
It's just like institutionalized abuse and institutionalized willful ignoring all of it. For generations.
Or straight up endorsing it. I remember there's like one like scene where it's like they're trying to figure out like who is like the toughest like kid in the institution. So the guards just basically set up an opportunity for them to scrap so they can figure out who the quote unquote the daddy is, because that's basically the institution can't run properly unless the daddy is like firmly established. You can't have friction. You got to know what the pecking order is.
Yeah.
And so the guards are like, oh yeah, and they're gambling on it and that sort of thing. They're totally complicit in this just severe fuckery going on amongst the children and the inmates.
Yeah, it's totally demented, and as of probably any prison. I mean, it's just psychologically and structurally.
He's explaining
demented.
to this young boy, he's like, there's like hard time and there's easy time, and if I'm gonna have easy time, I need to have a missus. He's like, you're my missus, and he's like, well, I've never done anything like this. It's like doesn't matter, you're my missus. And like people come to the room, he's like, you have to say hello to my missus. Like and it's like very proper, but they're like a couple, and like it is. Yeah, it's very frank.
I'm very glad to have lived in the late 20th century, 21st century in America.
Yeah, I mean that's late 20th century, that's late 70s. But yeah, Alan Clark, fearless filmmaker. But everyone, like when they talk about the UK, they talk about Michael Powell and David Lean and all these marvelous filmmakers, and they're incredible, amazing filmmakers. Alan Clark was just like had like his middle finger out to the entire world. It's like, you know what? I see the world a little differently, and I'm gonna tell stories about it.
Yeah, no, which is good. So maybe little with nail. Yeah, well,
I think with nail for you, because also I know Marcus Penn, who's one of my frequent co-hosts, is also real into Alan Clark. So I kind of sort of promised him that we could do an Alan Clark, but I don't know. We'll have to.
No, with nail. I would say with nail.
With nail is one of your special favorites.
I mean, Richard E. Grant.
We can maybe do that
amazing.
with like a double bill with How to Get Ahead in Advertising, which was the follow-up film with Richard E. Grant and the same director. I think the director's name is Bruce Robertson.
That's right. Yeah.
But they made a film about the advertising industry, and basically Richard E. Grant is just this merciless, just savage, who's a thriving exec who literally starts growing a second head, who's like an evil doppelganger personality that's like taking over his body. But it's literally how to get ahead in advertising. But
what's the great Hollywood film with Tim Robbins and the director who Roger Altman.
Yeah, you're talking about The Player? Or?
The Player.
Yeah,
Richard E. Grant is
he's
in that.
Phenomenal. He's incredible. He's great at everything.
He's
always good. Every time he pops up in anything, even like he's in the latest season of Game of Thrones, barely in it, but he's damn good in it. So yeah, he's a world-class talent.
I didn't know the Game of I'm behind in my Game of Thrones, as you know.
Season 6 restored my faith. I mean, season 5, I was getting to the point where I was thinking about stop watching the show altogether.
Right.
And I was letting a couple shows kind of like marinate for a few days before I would like even like bother to watch them. the last few episodes of season 6 really stuck the landing, and it's a very fun time to be a Game of Thrones fan. So
Yeah, no, I've got to get caught up, and so I, hopefully the book will come, but I will get caught up before that.
When's the
I'm
winner?
sure.
Yeah, the question is it going to come before season 7? HBO has confirmed that we are going to get season 7 and 8 are the last 2 seasons, and they're going to be abbreviated seasons. One's like 7 episodes and one's like 6. And so that's the end of the narrative as far as the show is concerned. So they're obviously condensing the narrative considerably.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I mean, because I feel like the first few seasons really were like taking their time, but now they're like really accelerating the pace.
We gotta
You
move.
feel that the
Yeah.
last few episodes, it's like sweeping status quo altering events one after another. Like, whoa, holy shit! Like, I've been waiting for this. I'm glad it happened, but wow, things are really fucking moving now. And so all of a sudden, it's just like nations falling and like things are in motion, and like it's like things are definitely picking up the pace.
Well, I was saying, maybe it's not dissimilar to the books, because I remember like book 4.
Slowest dog shit.
I mean, you're like, what is this guy doing?
Like, there's like 10 chapters of Brienne just riding on her horse.
Yeah, or Sam Tarley on a boat or something.
Yeah,
It's
it's like,
what is going on around here?
Sure wish I could have a chapter about Tyrion.
Yeah, it's like so strange. So, but maybe they're keeping the rhythm alive. But I've got to see it soon.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming back on Wrong Reel to talk some shit and bring some much needed expertise on a topic where I have almost nothing to offer. So yeah, that's kind of what I like to do with Wrong Reel. If I can get a guest to come on who has like a fountain of knowledge on a topic where I'm wholly ignorant, that's the best case scenario, because in the end, I like to learn about geeky shit too. And so this was a nice eye-opening talk about John le Carré.
Well, you're generous with your praise, and it's great to be back. And I look forward to doing another one soon.
Yeah, we'll find another topic and we'll get back at it. It's like, this is the only time I actually like drink for pleasure anymore. Like, unless I'm like get up to like weird like kinky thrills like in my spare time, but otherwise I basically don't drink anymore, except when either you or our rest, my personal trainer, when he comes on the podcast we get shit faced, and when you come on the podcast we drink. So those are my favorite times to drink. So
Well, I'm glad I can add a little spice to the evening.
absolutely, 100%. Well, thank you so much for listening, everybody. If you like this podcast, please remember to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, SoundCloud, or Google Play Music, or you can check out my YouTube channel at geekin.nyc, and that actually is the name of the channel. You don't have to go to the website geekin.nyc, but you can do that too. And you can find me at Twitter on at Colbrax, or Wrong Reel at Wrong Reel. And we hope you enjoyed the episode. And next will be my episode with Lady P about Joseph von Sternberg and Marlene Dietrich. So be sure to check that out. Thanks so much. Talk to y'all soon.